So it's been 2 days since Nvidia launched the lower end GTX 1060, and we finally have our first wave of benchmarks. The folks over at Guru 3D bring us our first set of benchmarks. Now before we get into the FPS and the comparisons and all that, let's first talk again about pricing. Here in Canada, the 3GB version is priced at $259 for the Zotac Mini version, which is the only version that's in stock right now, unfortunately, and the 6GB version is sitting at $349 right now. This is pretty normal pricing, but there is an MSI aftermarket 3GB 1060 that's priced at $315. And it's not exactly clear that it's a 3GB version unless you pay close attention. I'm calling it now. This is going to come back to bite Nvidia in the back at some point in the future. Anyway, this makes it a $15 price difference between the most expensive 3GB model and the cheapest 6GB model, which is the Asus $329 blower version. Until pricing settles down, I would hold off on buying any of these new generation cards because the retailers and add-in board partners need to get their shit together because they clearly have some work to do on this. Okay, now on to the benchmarks. Guru 3D ran these benchmarks with the MSI version of the card, which is priced at $219, which is basically what you're looking at if you want an aftermarket version with the custom PCB and the cooler and all that stuff. The cards we're using in this comparison are the MSI GTX 1060 3GB, the 1060 Founders Edition, and I'm throwing in the reference RX 480 for comparison, because just to compare to see what you can get at this price range. All the numbers are for 1080p because that's what these cards are really targeted for, although you could make a case that they could probably kill it at 1440p too. Right off the bat, we can see that there isn't much difference between the lower end 1060 and the 6GB model with the FPS and Doom running on Vulkan at 109 for the MSI card and 114 for the 6GB, with the AMD card having the clear advantage at 127 FPS. Good job AMD, you clearly saw this coming with the Vulkan and DX12. Clearly prepared for this. In Far Cry Primal, the RX 480 and the 3GB MSI card both get 66 FPS, with the higher end 1060 having a small advantage at 71 FPS. I was surprised at the low frames per second here, then I remembered the games from Ubisoft, and then it all made perfect sense. Moving on to DX12 and Hitman 2016. The MSI card here comes in at 52 FPS, with the higher end 1060 getting a lot more with 65, but the RX 480 blows both of them out of the water here, getting 75 frames per second. If Vulkan and DX12 really catch on, the RX 480 is going to become a no-brainer. Rounding off our benchmarks with Tom Clancy's The Division. The 3GB 1060 gets 58 FPS here, while the higher end 1060 gets 62 FPS. What's interesting here is that the RX 480 gets 59 FPS too, which really isn't supposed to happen. These 1060 cards are supposed to have a clear advantage over the RX 480 in terms of DX11 games. One of the other worries with this lower amount of VRAM on the 3GB 1060 was that the frame times were going to be really bad, like the 295x2 type bad, because people were predicting that this is going to be a 780 Ti situation where the 3GB VRAM was not going to be enough and it was just going to have massive frame time spikes. This does not seem to be the case. From Guru 3D's testing with the FCAT, this does not seem to be the case. The 1063GB is running perfectly fine, has no frame latency issues, so don't worry about that if you're thinking about it. Okay, now let's talk about overclocking. The RX 480 isn't really known for overclocking, and it's really hard to get it more than like 1350 MHz, and this is where the 3GB 1060 really has a chance to get ahead. In their testing, Guru 3D were able to get their card running at 2164 MHz, which is like 18 to 20% overclock, which is pretty massive, and 9.1 GHz on the memory. This is a pretty good overclock, but doesn't show up in the performance numbers really, because the overclock only gives a 3 FPS improvement in Hitman 2016 and a 4 FPS increase in Rise of the Tomb Raider, running at 1440p. This puts it basically on level terms with the 6GB 1060, it's like within a frame. So if you overclock the crap out of the lower 1060, you basically get a 1060. Now we'll see if that's actually worth doing in real life, because the 1060, the higher one, can overclock as well, and it can overclock pretty damn good, but doesn't reach anywhere near 1070 levels, but it does provide a really nice performance boost. Okay, so with the benchmark starting to roll in, the question becomes, is the 3GB 1060 worth the money? The answer is a little complicated and mostly depends on pricing where you live. If you're on a tight budget and can find an aftermarket 3GB 1060 for around $199, definitely go for it, but finding a 4GB RX 480 is probably a better deal, or even an 8GB RX 480 if you can get a discount on it is probably the best bang for the buck here, especially with its DX12 and Vulkan performance. This graphics card generation is turning out to be pretty damn close. Anyway, thanks for watching guys, like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff, and I'll see you in the next video.